squared up? I'm not squared up. Insert a sock under the camera because I'm a professional videographer. Square on one side. Hello, welcome. So today I'm giving you a lovely coffee shout out to Heledd. Diolch yn fawr iawn, Heledd. Thank you very, very much indeed. It's so generous of you. If any of you would like to donate to the coffee fund, it's always appreciated. The link is down there and on the banner art on my channel. Sahti. Today we're talking about medieval beer. Well, no, we're not. We're talking about medieval ale. Crap. Great start. Today we are talking about a Finnish medieval ale. And it is called Sahti. And I think I'm pronouncing it right. If I'm not, if there are any Finns watching, I apologise, I tried. So, what is this magical medieval Scandinavian beer? Well, it's pretty exciting stuff actually, and it's really, really easy to make. So, let's dig in a little bit first to the history of this stuff. So the first mentions of Sahti as we know it today are from the medieval period, and I'm talking about the 1300s-ish, where we learn about Finns making beer in this way that makes it Sahti. Later on, in the 16th and 17th centuries, it becomes a much more established part of the culture in Finland. In the 18th and 19th centuries, it is firmly established, and in the 20th century and into the 21st century, it has become such a firm, identifiable part of Finnish culture that the European Commission actually gave Sahti a special protected status. So you cannot call what you make Sahti unless you are making a raw, unhopped, juniper-infused ale in Finland. So if what you are making isn't from Finland, you do not get to call it Sahti. So what I am making is not Sahti. What I am making is a Sahti-style ale. Okay? Great. So is this a Viking beer? If the earliest we've got mentions of Sahti specifically is from the 1300s, no, it can't be. But we do have evidence of beer from the Viking Age. There were beer barrels from the mid-9th century. In fact, they were deposited in 834 AD on the Oseberg ship, big famous Viking ship full of treasures and a skeleton of a woman. So, is that Sahti? We don't know. There's no real way for us to know. It was a beer of some kind or an ale of some kind made from malted grains. Checking I'm in focus. I'm in focus enough. Sahti is a very specific kind of ale. We know that in the 10th century in the Åland Islands, which are between Finland and Sweden, they were malting grains. And it would make sense that what they were making is pretty close to Sahti. But we know that in Scandinavia they were also using hops and they were using all kinds of other different ingredients. And this is where I take a little bit of umbrage at the magnificent Greg from How to Drink, because he did a video on Viking beer recently, and I absolutely adore his channel. I have subscribed to it and I love it so much, and I watch him on Twitch and he's great. His video on Viking beers did a naughty thing. He did a naughty bad thing. Greg, you did a naughty bad, and you said that Viking beer would be quite rough and ready. The Vikings were brewing beer in a tradition that at that time went back at least 800 years. They knew beer. They knew how to make beer. The Vikings knew how beer worked. They came from a Northern European brewing tradition that went back probably further than 800 years, but we know that beer was being produced in Northern Europe in the Roman period. We know that beer was being made in Britain in the pre-Roman Iron Age. So the Vikings knew how to make beer. This wasn't a brand new barbarian society who had no idea what they were doing and were just putting grain into a bucket and praying to Odin. They knew how to make beer. They could make barrel loads of beer of a quality good enough to bury with whoever the heck the Oseberg woman was. Somebody important. Queen. we know that they knew how to make beer. Brewing was a tradition even at that point. So, they weren't just throwing stuff into a pot and praying. They knew how to create an alcoholic beverage from malted grain. Malting is something that takes technology, it takes time, and it takes a great deal of know-how. So they were already people with the know-how to get grain to germinate, stop the germination through drying, and then release the sugar from the grains to create a fermentable wort. They knew how to make beer. Okay, tiny mini rantette over. I'm really bad at ranting. Somebody in the comments of one of my videos told me I couldn't rant properly because I'm too nice. So I'm going to try and rant better next time, I guess. I don't know. I'm not a ranter. I'm a lover, not a fighter. So, back to Sahti. Sahti is a raw ale. You don't boil the wort. There are still lots of beers around that you don't boil the wort. There is a beer in Gotland. I can't remember the name of it right now. I think it's... nope, it's gone. Editing Jimmy, put it on the screen. In fact, a lot of you know about Hefeweizen, which is a type of beer from Germany. Originally, that wasn't boiled. The wort for a Hefeweizen wasn't boiled. There are lots of other beers in northeastern Europe, around the Baltic, where beer isn't boiled. So it's raw. Does that make it dangerous? No, not really. As long as you're careful with it. What it means is the cleanliness of your equipment is super important. It means that following kind of the traditions quite closely and the instructions in the recipe that you choose to use is really important. And it means you have to drink this stuff fast. So boiling doesn't just help with cleaning the water, it means that you get a longer shelf life. Now, in the medieval period, would this be a dangerous drink? I mean, maybe. Slightly more dangerous than a boiled beer. But let's remember that at this stage in European history, there was no germ theory. The idea that people didn't drink water in the medieval period is blown out of the water in my basically first video on YouTube, so go check that out. Click the card, help my engagement, grow my channel, subscribe. Gently tap the subscribe button. So people were making this beer not because it boiled the water to make the drinking water drinkable, but because it contains alcohol and it'll get you pissed. Beer wasn't drunk in the medieval period because there was no drinking water. Beer was drunk in the medieval period to get you squiffy, and because some people didn't have access to good drinking water. Always remember there was no germ theory. Always remember they had no idea that boiling killed germs. All they knew was that sometimes if you had dirty water and you boiled it, you wouldn't get so sick. If you had clear running water, they would drink that. If the water was running clear in a stream, that was considered drinking water. If it came out of the well without bits in it, that's drinkable water. Potable. So, we are making a medieval, with possible earlier Scandinavian roots, possibly Viking-style ale, and this stuff is absolutely amazing. Sahti is also a farmhouse ale, so this is something that is made rurally, this is made in small batches, it's made on a very small scale. This is a folk drink, if you like. And there is a big tradition in modern Finland where if somebody is making a batch of Sahti, you'll go around their house 3 days after you can smell them brewing it, and they'll have a fresh batch of beer. Like 3-day-old ale. And we as modern beer drinkers and brewers are used to leaving our beers for a week, 2 weeks, a month, 6 months if you're making a stout, an imperial stout. And this is stuff that you can drink in a couple of days. And that is how medieval beer worked. Generally speaking, medieval beer was drunk fresh. It was drunk whilst the fermentation was still happening. So, this is an example of that. Okay, so it's not a modern beer, it's not a modern ale, it's not going to taste or look like a modern ale. Okay, so, there we go. For one thing, it's not going to be fizzy. It's not going to have any head to speak of, I think. Yeah. what do we start with? We start with the recipe. I got my recipe from a website called Brewing Nordic. There are lots of other recipes. I have actually put a couple in the description of the video here so you can experiment. And I scaled this down. So the original recipe was for 20 litres of Sahti. I've scaled that down to 1 gallon, which is 8 pints, which is about 4 litres. So I'm using a fifth of the ingredients, which means that I am using 2.5 pounds of grain. So I'm using about 1 3/4 kilograms of grain. And I will be using red rye, because rye is a very popular ingredient for Sahti, and there is evidence of rye being grown in Finland right back to the, I think, 12th century, so just post-Viking age. So I'm using a lot of rye. I'm also using some Munich malt, which is, again, pretty equivalent to a lot of the malts being used over in Finland. There are specific malts you can use that are designed for Sahti. I can't get hold of those right now. And I'm going to be using this other malt, which is just sort of fairly standard lager malt. How do we go from having bags of seeds to having beer? Well, the process is pretty dang cool. I beg your pardon, I'm coughing all over the place today. It's not the Rona. So these grains have already been crushed, which helps to release all of the goodness in them when you put them in the water. I am taking this 2.5 pounds of grain and putting them into a gallon of water. And originally I was going to try and be clever and put them all in a muslin bag so that I could just take the bag out afterwards and it wouldn't create any mess and it wouldn't create any fuss. But the muslin bag was way too small and that didn't work. So I just threw the grain into the pot. Traditionally in Sahti, this would all be made in a large wooden tub. I don't have access to a large wooden tub right now, so I am just using a saucepan. All of this has been sanitized. The saucepan has been sanitized, the tub that I use for transferring the liquid into has been sanitized, the spoons have been sanitized, the thermometer is sanitized, I have been sanitized. Everything has been sanitized. That's not a traditional part of the Sahti, and obviously in the medieval period, some of the yeast, the wild yeast that you use in brewing, would have come from unsanitized equipment. I'm not doing that because I have a history of my beers going horribly ski-whiff if I don't do good sanitizing. So this is the modern thing that I'm doing in this recipe, is sanitizing. I don't want to get sick. I don't want my beer to go wrong. I want to just make a good beer. So clean your stuff. What we then do is increase the temperature really gradually. And this is a key part of all of the recipes I found, is you increase the temperature gradually. The gradual increase in temperature mimics an ancient technique for heating water, which is putting hot stones into a tub of water. Our equivalent here is getting the water up to 40 degrees Celsius, leaving it there with the grain in for an hour. Okay? Get it up to 40, keep it as close to 40 as you can. You don't have to clock watch. My technique that worked really well was I had it on a big gas hob. I got it up to 38 degrees. I took it off the big gas hob, put it on a tiny gas hob on the lowest heat, and just left it there for an hour, and it stuck around 40, 42 degrees. It was fine. Then, making sure you're stirring it, and it will look like porridge. Don't panic. It's totally fine that it looks like weird oatmeal. Crank it up to 50 for an hour. You crank that bad boy up to 50 degrees for an hour, leave it. If you need to top up the water level slightly, that's fine, but you don't want to dilute this weird porridge too much, okay? If it's affecting the temperature, if the temperature is getting too high, tip a little bit of water in. And I'm talking like 1/4 of a pint of water, half a pint maybe. Just be careful, don't dilute this stuff too much. See why later. After an hour, you crank it up to 60, and then, after an hour at 60 degrees, you smash it up to 70. You see where this is going. This takes a long time. And part of the reason we're doing this is so that all of the sugars get released from the grains, because that is what gets pooped out of the yeast in the form of alcohol. Yeast eats sugar and poops out alcohol. That's how beer works. So that's what we're trying to do here. We're trying to get as much of that sugar out as possible. Now, above 70 degrees, most of that's not going to happen anymore. Most of the process that happens, the science that happens, stops at 70 degrees, and that is what is called a mash out. So that's how you stop any more sugar from getting released. The magic ingredient to a Sahti comes after you have finished heating the wort. So after 4 or 5 hours of gentle increases in temperature, the magic happens with Sahti, because then you move on to the process called lautering. And lautering is where you pour more water over the grain, kind of like a... I don't even know what it's kind of like. It's lautering. That's all. I can't think of it. Imagine you putting tea leaves in a tea strainer and poured water over the top of it, and then the tea came out. It's like that. And that just makes sure you've got all of the sugars out of the enzymes. So lautering is the next process. In a traditional Sahti, they use an amazing piece of kit called a kurna, and that is a big trough filled with little wooden plates with a bed of juniper branches. And the juniper branches filter the liquid. So you just take this grainy stuff, you put the liquid out of it, and all of the grain and all of the junk, and you filter it through these branches, and then you pour water over the top to get as much of the sugary goodness out. A lot of modern Sahti brewers use metal grill, and I don't have a kurna, so what I did was put some branches into the mash. Huh? Like a spruce ale. But it's not much like a spruce ale, really. I don't think I used enough of the branches. Hey-ho. Take all of the mush out, sieve the mush, use lots of water to get as much as possible out of the mush, try and keep it up to a gallon using this recipe. If you're using a different recipe, try not to take it over your maximum level of liquid, because you'll dilute the ale. If you want to dilute the ale, fine, go for it, water down your beer. If you want to make a weaker version of this, by all means, use less grain per gallon, or use this amount of grain for slightly more water. Entirely up to you. And then you add the yeast. This is brewing. So once you've strained all of the liquid off the gunk, basically there's not much left to do. You wait for it to get down to its fermenting temperature, and the fermenting temperature for this recipe is around 15 to 25 degrees. I'm using bread yeast. Homebrewers, don't kill me. This is the recipe. The recipe said to use bread yeast, and honestly, I can kind of see where that's coming from. Prior to the breeding and development of specific brewers' yeasts, a lot of the yeast people were using was probably the yeast available from baking leavened bread. And honestly, I've brewed with baker's yeast before and it's been fine. Just doesn't taste as much like a modern beer. But this isn't a modern beer, this is a medieval ale, it's fine. So, the step that we've just missed out is the boiling. Normally, when you get the mash up to its temperature, you then boil the liquid to clean it. We haven't done that. So now what we do, once it's down to its temperature, it gets down to 20 degrees, and that can take some time unless you have specialist equipment, is you chuck in 10 grams of yeast. I actually made a starter, so I put 10 grams of yeast into a cup of warm water with half a teaspoonful of sugar, shook it around, left it for half an hour, and boom, bang, a bang. It was a little yeasty cloud. Tip that into the wort, tip that into the liquid that you have. You now have a gallon of, effectively, raw beer. Basically. Put that into a demijohn with an airlock, wait for it to start bubbling. Now mine took overnight to start bubbling, but when it started, oh boy did it bubble. It was kind of alarming how quickly it started bubbling. But it carried on bubbling for about 3 days, and then it started to slow down. As soon as it starts to slow down, get it cool. Cool it right down. My mate from Finland, who gave me some advice on this, said that some people don't do that. Some people will leave it for 3 days to ferment and then just drink it straight away. But his recommendation was to cool it right down, almost to freezing. So I left it outside in my hallway because I live in Scotland and the temperature down there hasn't got above 3 degrees this week. So, woo, nippy. After another 2 days down there, I brought it back upstairs, and now we're going to taste some. It's on my windowsill. Alright. So I have taken the liberty of pouring it into a charming little swing top bottle I got from my friends. Look at it, it's cute. It's a little bit cloudy. I'm just looking at my microphone. It's a little bit cloudy, microphone. It's a little bit cloudy. It hasn't been filtered in the modern sense, in the modern mass production brewing sense. It hasn't been filtered. It hasn't been fined, where you add bits of fish guts to clarify the beer. This is kind of as raw as a raw ale can be. So this is pretty close to how medieval beer would be made, actually. I took measurements from it before it went into the fermenter with the yeast, and having taken it out of the fermenter, and this is 6.5%. I measured it after 3 days before I put it downstairs, and it was at 6.3%. So in 3 days, using 2 pounds a gallon of grain, you can make a 6.5% ale. This is fresh, raw ale. There's still a little bit of yeast in there, I can see on the top. There's hardly any mush down at the bottom, which is nice, and I think that's because we didn't boil it, so I'm going to stop putting off the inevitable now. Okay. Ooh, it's a nice colour. I think that's all the red rye that we used. It's giving its lovely, deep red colour when it comes out. I'm not going to put that on the bed. Recipe for disaster. Palate cleanser. If it turns out to be horrible, it's just a bottle of Guinness. So, here we go. This is the Sahti. This is my Finnish Sahti. My medieval Finnish ale. It's kind of a lovely colour, actually. Like a really deep red. You can smell the booze. Oh my god, you can smell the alcohol. Oh, there's a piece of fluff in it already. Reenactor flats. It doesn't have much of a smell to it. It doesn't smell of a lot. Like, it smells a bit yeasty and a bit malty, so... Dang. That's actually really refreshing. I see where you have it cold. I see where you have to cool it down. That's really good. It's like quite full-bodied. It's really full. Oh wow, it's really full-bodied. Oh my goodness, it's coming back. It's super malty. It's super malty. There is a little bit of bitterness, which might have come from the spruce actually. After a couple of sips, you can taste the spruce. So I think if I'd used oh, I used spruce branches, by the way, not juniper, I forgot to mention. There's no juniper around here. Cannot find any juniper bushes, I tried. If anyone knows of any juniper trees around Edinburgh, DM me so it's a secret. Oh, there's a little bit of spruciness to it. Yeah, there's a little bit of like this Christmas... It's the smell of a Christmas tree. It tastes like the smell of a Christmas tree. That's really cool. Oh my goodness. Medieval Sahti. Wow. Super cool. I highly recommend you guys make some of this. This stuff is super easy to make. You could probably experiment a lot with the grain profile. But yeah, a couple of pounds of grain, like 1.5 kilograms of grain per gallon, so per 4 litres. Stick it in a saucepan, simmer it for a few hours, and then add a little yeast and leave it for 3 days, and you've made a strong ale. This is really cool. How cool is this? You've made an ale suitable for a Viking queen to be buried with. So, I hope you enjoyed that, guys. I hope this is interesting for you. I'm absolutely over the moon with this. This is super cool. Oh my goodness. Wow. This is really good. I love this. Oof. That's super strong. The booze is strong. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed this, guys. I hope this was interesting. Diolch yn fawr iawn unwaith eto am ymuno. Thank you once again, as ever, for joining. It's lovely to see so many new people. We're over 6,000 subscribers, so thank you to everyone who's subscribing. It really warms my heart to see when new people have decided to join. And thank you for all of your lovely comments and messages recently. A few of you have asked about me getting a PO box. I am working on getting a post office box. They're quite expensive. They're like 250 quid. So, if I can find one that I can afford, I will get a post office box, because a lot of you guys have been asking about that, so it's very sweet of you to ask. Tan tro nesa, diolch yn fawr iawn am wylio. Till the next time, thank you very much indeed for watching. Hwyl am y tro. Bye for now. That is dangerously drinkable. What did you do today, James? I got wankered on Sahti. Sahti style ale. It's not Sahti. I'll get sued by Finland. The Finns will come for me. It was a little bit of gunk. Them's vitamins.